This is a condemned property. I was called out on a couple weekends ago by the fire department. The rear portion of it collapsed, affecting the other occupied dwelling. For all intents and purposes, it didn't show any kind of outward signs that it was going to collapse. It had been condemned, but it didn't really reveal anything that the collapse was imminent. It so happened there was some water infiltration that occurred, and it just caused the back to demolish. So that said, we had to move city assets to do the necessary clearances to mobilize to the site and then commence with demolition. Anytime there's a building that's attached, we have to undergo certain supportive measures to protect the occupied properties that adjoin the property. And once that's accomplished, then we'll commence with the actual demolition of the property. We'll have to saw cut the front of the building. As you can see, there's no seam on it, so that'll have to be done as well before we actually have the rig and actually start clawing away at the property. Decay starts to graduate as you get further into the 200 block and enter the 300 block. That's when you start seeing more of a decay. It's a very distressful problem. There's actually 19 other properties just on this stretch of road that have to come down on Crescent Street, and they're buying and selling them on the tax sales for $500. Sometimes they're transferring 3 times in one day. We have owners in Australia, Indonesia, Mexico. They're just basically getting frequent flyer miles as they go on eBay sites and real estate sites and being auctioned off to different individuals. So that creates a real problem for us. We're just trying to reissue new condemnation orders, so we can do the proper clearances and any kind of enforcement measures we can, which were limited because they are out of state and out of country. But this, again, this wasn't on our immediate list to take down. It just so happened that due to the occurrences, it just jumped up to priority. Demolition will probably start at the beginning of next week. Once we finish, all the other supportive measures, we have to clear the back and make room for attacking it from the rear. Once all those are in place, then we feel comfortable with the other occupants and everything's in place, then we'll actually commence with actual excavation of the property. This will probably take, I want to say, probably a little more than 2 weeks because of the fact that it is adjoining, so a lot more care has to be done as opposed to a property that's out in the middle of nowhere or a semi-detached property. So that's why these types of properties are very, very labor intensive. A lot of it has to be done by hand. This particular property, we'll have to have someone actually put party walls on to do that, but probably a little more than $30,000 to do this property. We have a certain allocation each year that we do a mix of bid out properties for outside bidders along with our in-house team. We do try and have the in-house team do as much as possible simply because we get the best bang for our buck. We can take them down for actually half the costs that an outside bidder would, simply because we own all the equipment. So we do try and make our best effort to do what we can in-house. The same as we did with the recent Agate Street demolitions. We did all those in-house. But it's tragic because these were built in 1906. I see this every day. I see my relatives grew up on this street back in the 1900s, so it's particularly personal for me to watch these properties fall into decay, had to be demolished. So it's very distressful. It's somewhere around 2009 it may have been occupied. When we kind of look at some certain violations or responses from us, as well as the water termination. It looks like the water was terminated somewhere in 2009. Whatever caused it to be bladed, whatever the postmortem, there's different postmortems for how a property becomes bladed, is anybody's guess. But this one was different in it. There was only one owner that we show on record prior to this for it going on tax sale, which is kind of uncommon. You usually see 3, 4, maybe even 5 ownership changes. We've seen some that have been vacant since the 90s that have remained vacant, and they just keep rotating back and forth on the tax sales. And ultimately they come into our world, and the property owner still owns the property. They will still own the lot. We'll do a lien and civil suit for all it's worth. But we'll still have the vacant property, and that becomes problematic as well because it's experienced the illegal dumping, the high grass and weeds. So those are some things that we try and maintain the best we can, with our limited resources. A lot of times what we'll try and do is get it into the adjoining property owner's hands too, to expand their real estate value. And I've actually talked to the owner of this particular property, the neighboring property at 446, and there was some small interest at perhaps acquiring that particular property and fencing it off and using it for kids or whatever. We haven't had a lot of complaints on this particular property because looking at the face of it before This occurred, it didn't really give any outward signs. It wasn't open to unauthorized entry, so it really didn't pop up on anybody's radar or any complaints. But it definitely has an adverse psychological effect on the neighbors, as well as the streetscape. I mean, you're going to have this missing tooth here on this streetscape, as well as you're going to have 18 more missing teeth, on the streetscape. So that really presents a problem even from a planning perspective. It was actually purchased at a tax sale or the previous individual purchased it for somewhere around the neighborhood of $4,000. This person bought it off a 2011 tax sale, I believe, for $300, and it's getting ready to go into tax sale again because they've done nothing, and they live in New Jersey. She's been issued 2 citations, 1 non-responsive, and summary citations don't have a lot of traction when they go out of state. Even the misdemeanors that we put out, we'll put them in the National Crime Information Computer as a warrant, misdemeanor warrant, regardless of where they're at, but that would only yield any kind of benefit if they get, if there has to be a background check for a job or something along those lines. I used to routinely do those back in the 90s, and sometimes we yield some results. They want to come back and correct the situation to clear their record. But more often than not, it's an exercise to do it and just see if it does yield any kind of positive results.